Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's OAAA lunch break. I'm Stephen Freitas. Today, the topic is Outlook, how out-of-home can drive immediate results. With us today are two marketing experts. We have the CEO of Serial Marketer, David Berkowitz, and the former CEO of WPP's The Store, Gwen Morrison. Now, David previously served as the Chief Strategy Officer at the social listing technology firm Synopsys. And prior to that, he was also the first Chief Marketing Officer of Publicis Group's creative agency, MRV. Gwen has spent many years running the Store, a WPP leading communication service group. There, the responsibilities were in leadership of the retail innovations and support global resources for WPP's businesses worldwide. Before we start, I would like to go over a few housekeeping details. If any of you have questions during the webinar, you can certainly ask those questions through the question bar on your screen. And should you have any difficulties at all, we can use the chat function to communicate with you, and OAAA staff will be happy to support you. After the webinar later today, you'll receive a link to a post-webinar survey, and we also will make this webinar available as a recording later in the day, so you or your friends can listen to the recording later on. Well, welcome, Gwen and David. Thanks for joining us today. I guess starting off, we want to just sort of ask, what have you guys been up to? What have you been doing? How have you been quarantining in place, and how have you been keeping yourself busy when you're not working?
Well, as you pointed out, I recently retired. I was out in Arizona, and all of the events that I was planning to present at, like World Retail Congress, and I was supposed to be at Shop Talk, and on and on. So with those all kind of coming to a grinding halt, I decided to retire. Although my friends point out I'm not retiring, I'm actually rewiring. So that's why you still see me here. I'm still part of the game. I'm not going away. I'm just going to serve the industry in different capacities, more as advisory roles. But for fun, I've just taken a sabbatical and sailed over 400 nautical miles in the northwestern area of Lake Michigan.
Well, sailing on a vessel is probably one way to really stay socially distant from everybody else.
Absolutely.
Good for you. David, what have you been doing?
Yeah, sailing on a vessel really is out of home, so that's yeah. Well, I've been holed up in the middle of Manhattan and in this very different feeling city the past few months, and like the past couple of years as my work initially took me from the agency side to working much more with tech and product focused companies. I'm spending a lot of time in the out of home space, and this year that's been primarily with working with a company called Outer Nets that deals a lot with this experiential out of home tech connecting the physical and digital and in general. So it's clearly a very challenging time to be grappling with out of home and trying to figure out where it can deliver the most value. But I also think that it's just compared to a lot of other areas of media where there's just so much innovation going on right now, and there's so much excitement, and I think it's just as out of home's been really it was like hitting its stride more and more broadly. A lot of this was already coming to the forefront, and now there was just some study that was saying something like how this the pandemic has accelerated marketers' shift to digital by like 7 years or something like that. And I feel like in out of home is happening even faster because there's just a lot more to go on. So working with some companies like this on their marketing challenges and getting in front of brands and agencies, and figuring out like how to partner in the smartest ways. It's been definitely an interesting time to do it in, but a lot of fun in trying to navigate all this.
Well, it is an interesting time to navigate what's going on, both in terms of the way media business is really transforming pre-COVID, and now, of course, the way in COVID. Well, David, when we first talked, you really wanted to talk today about how out-of-home can drive immediate results, and that's kind of the thesis of today. And you were really excited because a good friend of yours, Gwen, was willing to join the conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to you now to have your fireside chat with Gwen and talk a little bit about how you see out-of-home sort of evolving in the next few years and in the future to be a more results-driven media channel. Take it away.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks so much, Stephen. And it's really fun to be here because I'm a big fan of the OAAA's work. And look, some of this for me is I've had the pleasure of learning from Gwen a bit recently, but also just Gwen, just hearing a bit of your perspective. Like, I mean, especially from like until the pandemic hit, right? And so it's almost like you need to go and take this big elephant in the room and like put it out of the room for a minute. But until March or so, I'm curious what you've seen as some of the biggest changes in out of home.
Sure. Well, out of home has always been a great reach medium. And so in traditional, I had many years in like foot cone and belting and Young and Rubicam doing more traditional advertising and media plans. And it was always very interesting to look at that as a proximity marketing tool because when you're matching that up with where retail, it's like we talk, out of home is like in life. And so there's a really great opportunity if executed properly, to have looked at out of home as, billboards in the traditional sense. But then fast forward and you've got, digital and dynamic messaging through the technologies that became more accessible. You could have bigger screens, the prices came down. And then we had these things like in-store media networks. So a lot of the retailers jumped into that. And it was the time when, let's say, advertising and TV channels were accelerating in numbers. So while they proliferate, you saw retailers consolidate. And there was that time when I think the Walmart, the PRN Walmart network called it, the fourth largest viewing network in America because of the footfall. So we were counting, the shoppers as if we were counting viewers. And that was a bit misguided, and I won't go down that whole rabbit hole, but, fast forward to today, you have a possibility of putting the medium right in context with physical product. You have the opportunity to create these experiences in places that are maybe you're unexpected, maybe there's dwell time, train stations, so forth, where you do have a bit of time on your hands, airports. So I think it's, what technology has allowed us to imagine different ways to interact with brands. And then that elevates the entire industry because we're, particularly recent study I saw with Brand Z indicated how the experiential brands, those brands that create positive, fun, engaging experiences are actually elevate in value and customer loyalty. So I see the role of this part of the industry as having phenomenal opportunity as we've stitched together different technologies and even voice, for example.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of fascinating elements of all this, and it also sounds like, just one of my favorite frameworks in general that Procter and Gamble introduced was this whole moment of truth concept, right? Mm-hmm. And so for them it's all about just that moment of impact when you actually get to when you actually get to the shelf and you have that split second to go and influence the purchase there, and how many purchases are.
But of course, that's all being challenged now.
So and look, and Google had come out with this version of it, like the zero moment of truth. So right at that moment of search, like,
it was ZMOT.
So yes, the ZMOT, and so there were great acronyms based on that, and I'm curious now, like especially with this intersection of out of home and then and retail, and with retail we're also talking about a couple areas, right? Because we're talking about three that come to mind, and one is you've got inside the store. Then you've got the store window where you're also trying to get people to go inside the store, maybe take some action there. And then you've got properties that the retailer doesn't own. And so anything kind of leading up to that. And as we have this shift to digital, I'm curious if you think that there are any areas where there's the biggest opportunity to influence consumers.
Well, that's a big broad question. There's so many places to influence consumers, and that's how that what we called the path to purchase really became challenged from kind of that linear framework that we all knew to looking at influencers and social media. I mean, who would have imagined that we had unboxing as a thing that was going to influence whether you bought a Mattel toy or not, or makeup. So in so many different categories, we have this convergence of commerce and content. And so we have to look at that as, it's a challenge, of course, but how do you get in the game? And how do you become, interact with consumers in ways that reward them, engage with them, et cetera. So if we're talking a more, back to the context of out of home, you think about where situational need states. I mentioned like a train station where you might have dwell time. There could be, vending can be considered out of home. What Best Buy had put in airports a number of years ago is makes an impact with people that are, on the go travelers, typically affluent, et cetera. I looked at the Sprinkles cupcake ATM as it's kind of an influencer out of home. I've seen post COVID-19 long lines, spatially distanced, but people still want to stand in line and interact with the cupcake and ATM. And then there was that example, and I think it was Outernets, where the Moet Hennessy put a beautiful kiosk into Grand Central Station, and it was, kind of invited you to interact and participate with the reward. And it took your information down, your email address, and got you a coupon for a discount within a certain time frame. So what would be considered out of home becomes highly interactive, participatory, and engaging. So and transaction related. So it's a data capture, it's a transaction driver. And so this is if you set out with those types of objectives, then it's a matter of stitching together the technologies and the creativity to bring it all to life.
Well, and this is a far cry. Like, I'm also coming into the out of home space in a far more recent lens, but I've got some appreciation for some of the change here, and some things that surprised me, like with that Moet Hennessy example, is that you're talking about out of home used for lead capture and even determining like the exact like that specific path to purchase. You can determine the ROI, you can determine the return on ad spend, and they're much different conversations than I've seen happening in the past in terms of just like, let's get the most exposure, biggest bang for the buck on the best canvas, and just like trying to be in the right area. But now there's that shift to being in front of the right specific audience, and converting that audience. And so to me, I mean, that seems like a really big shift for how this is placed and bought.
Well, there's a couple things there. I mean, in terms of that, the media landscape is completely changed. And because of the amount of influencers and as I put out, the convergence of commerce and content and so forth. And a number of years ago, I remember working on with Disney, and someone, by the way, in the audience had already asked a question about furniture idea. There was, the issue for Disney at the time was that everyone gets on the plane to go to Disney World, but when they get there, they have all these choices of where to go. You know, they could go to Universal Studios, they could go to SeaWorld, they could go, you know, a number of different types of venues. So how do you keep those people like in the park? And so we looked at those touch points and where do people buy the tickets, and developed furniture that was actually had a selling message within that about the combination of the multi-day passes. So it was acute to help people understand the value. It was just baked in, and those were in hotel lobbies. So that was a whole nother, you know, it's a situational need state. You got to think about when people and where people are making these decisions that have that big financial gain, and then see, you know, and think if it's a person-to-person conversation with a ticket agent, that you could put a piece of furniture in between them that actually helps guide that conversation.
So, another thing this makes me wonder about it, and also I love some of these examples in part because I think I was one of the first customers of these Sprinkles cupcake ATM in New York, and I'm probably still like way up on their frequent customer list, and so that I used to talk about Sprinkles so much on Twitter. They sent me a few gift cards early on, and I love that spot. But also more broadly, I think about like just the changing nature of retail spaces, and look, like, I mean, retail is getting extremely hit hard right now. I'm wondering just how many of these stores that I walk around. I'm right at 33rd and Madison, and I walk near Herald Square, and it's like, how many of these places will still be open by the end of the year, especially as some of some funding dries up. But then, do you see much opportunity to kind of like I could digitize some of these spaces, and there being some interesting attempts to like put media and even some of these like product delivery, or just like digital storefronts that are in these spaces. Like, do you think that could be an opportunity to try to go and capture? There's still like the Geopath data still shows a lot of foot traffic going on, still shows like a lot of these trips happening out of the home. So can these spaces just be used in different ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were a couple different points, and I'll try to get to each of them. One was more of the exterior, the storefront interaction, but also the footprint itself. And we had done some work with Coca-Cola on envisioning store of the future before the pandemic. And you look at the footprint very differently in the context of fulfillment and replenishment that's happening online. Or how do those items get just put together in a basket for you while you're doing the more interesting part of the shopping trip, where you're inspired by the fresh produce, the flowers, where you're planning for a party or something like that. So we were already looking at how the role of the person in the store would be changing relative to where the shopper needs were. The shopper gets identified at the exterior zone through the geolocation information. That typical weekly basket is being put together for them in the back. Has huge impact for the products that are those fulfillment products, those replenishment items that maybe the retailer doesn't think they need to be seen. That has tremendous impact on the shopper marketing budget, but that's a whole nother conversation. So we're already envisioning how the store could open up to have more visual impact with shelf edge technology that could bring these wonderful messages and images together in a retail environment where typically you wouldn't give up that much space. So just, marketing on the shelf edge was always a thin opportunity in terms of the real estate on the gondola run. Now think about having more opportunity to deploy different types of digital signage and other types of interactive, technologies that communicate value, inspire with recipe ideas, just all the kinds of things that people like to do at home on a Pinterest board. Why isn't that happening in a store? So you have to make that visit more rewarding as people become more comfortable with having all their groceries delivered to them or doing the click and collect. Interacting on the exterior of the store, I've seen, through the COVID-19 crisis, we've saw images of people standing in line outside of grocery stores, even like a Costco, and socially distanced. And I was in the winter in Arizona, it was becoming 100 degrees. Well, that's not sustainable. You can't have people sitting, outside of the store with a shopping cart separating them in the heat. So we have to envision a situation where we go into a parking lot of this and are recognized right away that we're there. Okay, we don't have to have the anxiety of trying to find a parking space outside of a store. That should be baked in. And consider how you could connect that geolocation and that queuing up with out-of-home messaging that's within your view, whether you're in a car or whether you're looking at something on the screen or you're outside in an urban environment outside the store, something that's very stimulating. So I think we just have to look at all these technologies are there. And some of them didn't have as much of a purpose. They were really interesting, maybe solving a problem that we didn't know we had, but now we have different problems. So I think that there's a great opportunity for this part of the industry to rapidly shift the view of what this role of out-of-home really is, because it can be so powerful if delivered properly.
Oh, well, I'd love to get into one piece of this, and just before we do, there's a good question coming in the Q&A in terms of defining a digital storefront, and I'll just note that this is like basically a digital screen in out of home type environment, like a store window, perhaps location for lease, where you can actually transact within that storefront. And I mean, even a version of that, for instance, is when you have something like Vengo, which I know is an OAAA member, and you can actually transact through their digital vending machines and the like. So these screens that enable commerce, but also it's interesting to the broader context of the question there is that we're like, so much of this is shifting so quickly that getting a lot of these definitions in place and all speaking the same language will be important, which is why these webinars are so important. And be great to see what other questions there are from the audience. But I did want to ask you something related to your remarks there. How does this change who the buyers, right? There are a lot of sellers on this call here. So as this bleeds into other areas in terms of shopper marketing, in terms of ways that like the store itself is used, then does it change the nature of who that buyer is, like the titles of the buyers themselves? Are there people that like sellers should be paying more attention to right now?
Are you talking about media buyers or?
Well, I'm talking about I'm talking about when the buyers of these out-of-home products, out-of-home media that are now shifting just beyond pure media. Like, does this mean that like different kinds of people are now buying this? And
well, and I think, and I'm not, the media, I don't have a background in media buying per se, but, and there are probably experts in the media space out there that could answer better than I, but from what I do observe, the toolkit has in the last 5 years has dramatically changed already. And the hardest thing has been for the buyers to look at shifting what can be tested and what are the metrics have been historically, or even last 10, 55 years, to these new platforms and mediums that are unknown. And I guess that the challenge is to look at how you can experiment, have some mad money, so to speak, while also staying, holding the course on those tried and true vehicles, ways to extend. But, this is all new. Now everything's up in the air. I mean, we don't have a baseball season. Think of all the money to just everything related to a sport. So this is a rethinking of everything. And it's a rethinking of what the needs are, again, for consumers as they interact with a physical retail environment, with feeling safe and secure, how a brand can also, on the exterior of a store, put out the message of everything that the brands are doing. And again, you mentioned the newest topic in retail now is the delisting. I mean, so many stores are now rationalizing the vendors that they're going to work with. So this is a lot of drama.
You want to share any more about that impact right now?
Well, that's kind of I don't want to go too far off our conversation, but I just think that we are going to see what it's really going to require is that every retailer and every brand, every business has to really understand the audience that they serve and the community that they're in, and to serve those audiences effectively. So it's no more, I serve everybody. There's this fringy, audience over here that I'll continue to serve with supply chain issues as they are. Everyone's trying to reduce complexity in their system.
But then that to me sounds like a huge opportunity for some of these digital technologies, because now you don't have to buy everything with the same brush, and you can even use this hyper local data to determine a lot of that messaging, a lot of that merchandising.
Right, absolutely, because if you're reimagining how people are going to navigate through a shopping mall, that's just one example. Mm-hmm. What's the role of the store becoming more a fulfillment center? The hours are going to shift. And I think it's great to look for inspiring examples that are not just brand new, but I remember this was at least 10 years ago, Hermes in Tokyo had an artist do this incredible installation had a face, like a black and white face of a woman just blowing, and her image was behind the scarf. But as the scarf moved, you could see her face in between, the image of the scarf blowing the scarf. And it was stunning. That's like a 24/7, the store closes and they have this impactful, beautiful message going all night long and until the store reopens. So we can look at the creativity alongside the technology, because both are connected. And now it really is a great time to be imaginative.
And so also with this shift to digital, like do you see some of this might depend on the it's definitely going to depend on the marketer's goals, but in terms of some of the metrics that are going to be rising in importance right now, and things that a lot of these retailers and marketers are going to be looking for, how do you see that changing?
I'd like to go back to something you just said about things becoming more digital, because I think what we're really seeing is how digital can make things more human. And how like Walmart recently was launched these new checkout counters where you're actually the associate, or they called them team members, I think they're associates now, but they would be physically there at a distance, interacting, providing a personal interaction with the shopper, but it's an automated checkout system. So that's part of this looking at the digital and the physical, and looking at how digital can create, all kinds of more connect with people's emotions. And so if you look at right now, there's anxiety, there's requirements for safety, there's the need for entertainment. So I'd almost go back and look at those kinds of goals, those opportunities, and then you can get into the metrics. And that's probably, a 2-day seminar somewhere. But I think it's did we succeed in getting, the engagement? Is there a long appreciation for us as a company? And at the highest level, this is the moment where, the companies can really articulate what they stand for in ways that will become that signature moment, with the consumer. So promise, like, here's an example. This was a number of years ago in Spain when the economy was tanking and unemployment was up to like 30%. Remember, that was like 8 or 9 years ago. And I think there was a beverage, I believe it was a Coke product, Limonada. And they were seeing that people were no longer buying their own beverage. They were sharing a beverage. That's how, constricted these financially constrained the shoppers were. So now it's summertime and everyone's heading to the beach as they could then. And they came up with this concept, a vending machine that would actually have a temperature component to it. And their commitment to the consumer was, as the temperature goes up and as you're thirstier and thirstier, the price of this limonada will go down. And so that was like this wow, response from consumers, like, you're on my side. You understand the challenge. It's getting hot, and I really am thirsty, and I want this refreshing beverage. So these were deployed, right on the beaches. That was really, again, where out of home advertising and becomes transactional in a vending machine. And it was just that moment where the technology was there, where they could incorporate the temperature component. So those kinds of commitments, like being on the side of the shopper, the consumer, are huge, and you can do them in many, many different ways. And I think out of home has particular the opportunity for interacting with people in real life.
Well, what I also love about that is that this is taking economics 101 and turning it entirely on its head, right? Like the entire law of supply and demand, where the corporate instinct would be, okay, well, hey, if it's north of 100 degrees, we could charge triple for this, right? We got price elasticity here up the wazoo, and instead of charging, and instead of lowering the price by half when it gets to 60 degrees and there's no one on the beach anymore, it's like actually doing this for consumer, like that whole concept to me is a radical shift in how, like, and then the tech just like the mindset is the big thing to shift. And then it's like, oh wait, is there a way to do this? What's the best way to do it? Like, then you can have that conversation about using the tech and media. So
building on that, it's the, taking a short-term, hit for a really long-term gain. And I think companies have to, evaluate that. And I've gotten a lot of lessons from retailers in emerging markets where they're serving this, like they're in this incredibly dynamic environment where, the truck drivers go on strike or someone's, protesting in the parking lots. And, that kind of disruption has been going on for a long, long time in markets like, South Africa and Brazil and so forth. So when you kind of look at, how retailers have served those in those really dynamic, unpredictable environments, you can get some lessons.
Yeah.
So now we have new technologies for that, but in terms of the principles driving those solutions, it's about the commitment.
And so for retailers that are look at this kind of thing now, and for those that are selling this into them, then like, how much do you think the focus needs to be very or should be very pandemic focused, and this is all about like educated consumers, all about health related things, versus just going back and saying, well, like what else could we just do to grow our business, support our stores, support the products that are being sold there? Like, I mean, like where do you think there's more of that focus should be right now?
Well, I don't think we're going back, and even, a number of years ago, I was at a department store global conference, and someone from Yale that was in like consumer, looking at youth values, and it's made a statement that I thought was very powerful. That was the younger audience will never age into the customer you know how to serve. And that resonates for department store, because there was always that life cycle. Like there's marriage, and then there's, motherhood, and then there's, whatever, retirement, you will never see those same behaviors again. So I think this has just accelerated that, 100 times. And people won't go back to behaviors that they won't spend more time shopping than they have to spend. They'll look at, their time with family differently. There are just so many areas that I think will change. So but that's answering the question, but it's just the reality is now is really the time to say, wow, how do we serve people in any capacity? And the bigger, you mentioned earlier, like partnerships, the unlikely partnerships that we've seen are so impressive. There was one fun example, but down in Australia, the McDonald's saw, well, we have a drive-through and people need a contactless way to get basics like bread and milk. So why can't we sell that through our drive-through? That's the example of just different way of thinking of what the assets are that you have and how you might leverage those in totally different ways.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, a lot of this, it's just that, and that is something excitement now in terms of just this like just willingness to rethink everything, right? And from the supply chain down to how you get people to your store in the first place.
Well, I think also just to add, it's like everyone was concerned about things like facial recognition, the creepiness factor, being identified. But, to the example I was giving earlier, if you are identified in a way that really serves you well, this is a chance for increased data capture from, through these different types of out-of-home storefront installations. There's new ways to interact with voice, and again, you've got a younger audience that's grown up with the phone in their hands, so they're always looking for new ways to have enhanced experiences, even in traditional environments. Like those game tables that I've seen in some of the QSRs, where kids are playing a game on the table that interacts, so things, the humanless, just one more point, the humanless store like a Amazon Go or even the digital menu board in McDonald's, actually I've observed creates a happier human interaction. No longer are people waiting in these long lines, and concerned about where they are in the line and how long it's taking the person in front of them to order. That all goes away. And then the crew person at McDonald's comes up to you and says, "How's your day going?" Like they never had time to do that before.
Yeah.
Never. And so once you this is causing us to rethink, this technologies that seemed expensive or a novelty, but now we have to think about, again, how you put them together in ways that make people feel good and feel safe.
The whole idea of feeling more human, where tech enables that, it's because I think there is also this greater appreciation for like especially as we get limited in how we can interact with people. Like there's just and beyond that, like broader lens of more empathy. It's just like we're just happy to see that some local shopkeepers, some of the waiters, some of the folks that maybe we didn't really pay attention to before. It's just like actually, yeah. I mean, I've asked far more people who are just working in a store how they're doing than I ever have before. And just having those moments become I think really powerful, especially when you can have tech shouldering some of that burden. There's a question that came in from Jill, and love to get your take on it. So she's asking you how out of home competes with traditional media today, and what you think are the most compelling strengths to out of home comparatively to other media.
Well, I think, as I kind of mentioned before, I think being physically in the community is really the great value because you have that, the geo-targeting aspect of it, but also, it's physically a part of where people live and work and play. So depending on, what the specific, medium is that you have, Jill, is it Jill, that, again, thinking, being more imaginative in, we talk about like the bus shelters, the things that people are going to say, this was helpful for me. I didn't get sopping wet in the rain. Now is there a way that element could actually, charge your phone? Can it provide you a cheap disposable umbrella that you would give back at the next one? These are all things that you can, as part of a community, think about that audience's situational need, again, depending on that form of the out of home.
Terrific. Also, I know we're coming up on time soon. I'd love to hear what takeaways you have for the audience from this discussion.
Is that for me or for Stephen? Stephen, you have the takeaways.
What are a couple of things you'd love to make sure to leave the audience with?
To just in part, I think I was trying to emphasizing that the short term, being first of all super nimble and coming to work each day saying I'm not going to do what I did yesterday. I mean, how do we think different about what we're delivering? And if you're selling out of home media, how do you really get upstream with the planners, the advertisers, to help them be creative about the possibilities? So how would you approach that differently than the way you might typically sell with audience delivery and so forth? Is there an empathy score? Can you measure, the emotion of those people in proximity to that message? So that's just some of the different ways of thinking, again, fueled by these newer technologies that not just put a message out there, but pull information in. Mm-hmm. I think that's where a lot of the brands and advertisers would want to play.
Fantastic.
Gwen, this has been a real fascinating conversation, and David, thank you very much. It's such an interesting perspective, because you are right, Gwen. Out of home really is in the people space, in the physical space, which means we have a whole different sort of proposition that we can offer a community and to brands and consumers alike. And we can really be part of that experience in a much bigger, different way. I think a lot of what you've talked about today really talks about how once maybe the large format out of home drives awareness, it then sort of can continue that conversation with the brand and with consumers at that point of purchase, or as you get closer and closer to that point of sale, which again, I think you're right, is a really amazing benefit of out of home, that we can be wide and we can really be part of that continued, path to purchase for consumers all the way down. Well, David, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate your thoughtful questions and commentary. Gwen, you're terrific. I hope you enjoy smooth sailing ahead on your next sailing venture. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session as much as I did. We have two terrific sessions next week, one that'll be focusing on D2C brands and another on data, so you won't want to miss those. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and please have a great afternoon. Goodbye.